folks, this is Rainiac bringing you another Series 7 Doctor Who review, the final review of the series in fact, because this was the series finale. Let's just get the housekeeping out of the way straight away. This review will contain massive spoilers for the name of the Doctor, so if you haven't seen it yet, please do not watch or listen to this review until you've seen the episode in full. Trust me, you'll thank me for it. Now we'll get to what I thought about the name of the Doctor in just a minute, but before then, FreezingInferno, friend of the show, or so he says, has requested a couple of minutes of your time to tell you all about what he thought about the episode. Take it away, Fresno.
So, there's these two guys in the panel blinks, and you're like, what the is this shit? I prepare for Doctor Who. But you got Doctor Who because it's like Gallifrey ages ago, and William Hartnell is stealing the TARDIS, and he shoves Susan in there, and oh my god. And then Colin Baker walks past the camera. Colin Baker's goddamn rainbow explosion coat in the 2013 episode, oh my god. And Sylvester McCoy is hanging off the thing with the literal cliffhanger from Dragonfire, and I think Paul McGann walked past the camera at one point, and Troughton is walking around, running through, like, palm trees in his fur coat, and Tom Baker's there, and John Pertwee's driving away, and Peter Davison is in the Matrix, and oh my god, it's the greatest fucking
FreezingInferno there, needing to calm the hell down. But I can kind of understand why he was so excited about this episode, because it was an absolute cracker. There's an awful lot to cover here, so let's just jump straight into it. The opening sequence was absolutely terrific. Jenna Louise Coleman looked really good in all the old outfits, and it was just fantastic to see all the classic Doctors in action for once, rather than just still images as we've had previously in the new series. It's also great to see Gallifrey on camera again. I think the last time that happened would have been, End of Time Part 2? I don't think it's been seen at all during Matt Smith's time as the Doctor. It might have been seen briefly in a flashback. It's never been mentioned in Matt Smith's time as the Doctor, but I don't think it's ever been seen before. Now, some of the old footage didn't marry up particularly well with the modern footage of Clara, but hey, they did the best of what they had to work with. It can be quite difficult to marry up something new with something old, so for what it was worth, I thought they handled it pretty well. Now, the scene where Clara encounters the Doctor as he's about to steal the TARDIS now actually contradicts what was said in The Doctor's Wife, where Idris, possessed by the TARDIS, said that she chose the Doctor. But this might seem like an apparent plot hole, but it may actually be down to what the Great Intelligence did, and then Clara going back to correct it. So it might have been originally the TARDIS did choose the Doctor, and then the Great Intelligence came along and made him pick the wrong one, so Clara had to go and correct it. More about that when we get to the mind-blowing last 15 minutes of this episode. Now, the music throughout this story was pretty stellar, but special mention has to go to the theme that was playing during this opening sequence, and also when the Great Intelligence stepped into the timeline. I could definitely hear parts of This Is Gallifrey, which was in Series 3, during the opening, and it fit the scene very well, because of course we're seeing the Doctor's past, and Gallifrey is also in the Doctor's past. And one last thing on this opening sequence, a lot of people initially thought that Paul McGann was not actually present in it, but he actually was. He runs past Clara just before Patrick Troughton emerges on the scene in his fur coat. He's only there for 12 frames, and trust me, somebody actually counted them, but he was there. The other Doctors did get significantly more screen time, and also I did love the look on Clara's face when she just sees the absolutely ridiculous literal cliffhanger from Dragonfire with Sylvester McCoy. Now, when I first watched this episode, I wondered how in the heck Clarence DeMarco knew about the Doctor and knew about Trenzalore, but second time around I realised it was the Whisper Men who obviously gave him the information to bait their trap. It wasn't explained outright in the episode, but it does make perfect sense. And Clarence himself was pretty creepy, especially when he was sort of ranting and raving about the Whisper Men, which again suggests that he was being manipulated by them to give the information to Vastra so they could be part of the bait in the trap set by the Great Intelligence. And the scene where Strax was fighting the giant guy in Scotland, that was hilarious and fit Strax's character to a T. This episode was very dark throughout, seriously dark. So, what little comedy there was helped to balance things, but they didn't go overboard with the comedy. And because of that, the comedy that was there was quite funny, but it didn't drown out the overall tone of the episode. I like the conference call scene between the Paternoster gang, Clara, and River Song. It helped to move the plot along, and it was quite well filmed. It's also a very clever way of bringing River back after she died in Forest of the Dead without actually going the whole way and resurrecting her. And I do like how Madame Vestra anticipated that Clara wouldn't trust her enough to light the candle. After all, they only just met in the Crimson Horror, and it wasn't a very long meeting at that. So she went ahead and drugged the letter anyway, so that Clara had no choice but to attend the conference. And speaking of the conference, Jenny's line of, "So sorry, I think I've been murdered," and then her fading out of the conference call altogether, that was chilling. Now, the impact of her death was softened about 15 minutes later when Strax brought her back to life with no consequences whatsoever, but I was personally happy to see her survive because, as I've said before, I am a big fan of the Paternoster Gang. If they made a spin-off with the Paternoster Gang in it, I would watch that till the cows came home. Also, on a side note, when River slaps Vestra to wake her up, in the making-of video that went up after the episode came out, Alex Kingston admitted that she slapped Ian McIntosh, who plays Vestra. She slapped her so hard that she felt the slap, even though she had full prosthetics on. That's a damn hard slap. Good grief. Now, Matt Smith has shown in both this series and in series previous that he can really portray real emotion whenever the need arises. And such a need arose here when Clara told him about the conference call and mentioned Trenzalore. In this case, it was genuine sadness that he portrayed, and he did it very well. I thought Matt Smith had a very strong episode, but you would expect that, considering that this is all about the Doctor's tomb, the Doctor's burial, his final battle, his death, although you don't actually see his death in this episode. Now, the TARDIS shutting down just over Trenzalore shows how much she cares for the Doctor. I'm calling her a she because Idris is the Doctor's wife, and I really don't mean to keep referencing the Doctor's wife, but that story is probably the only sort of reference point I've got, certainly in the new series, for information about the TARDIS, beyond it's a blue box that's bigger on the inside. She, again referring to the TARDIS, realised it was a terrible idea for the Doctor to visit his own grave and tried to stop him. But of course the Doctor was too stubborn for her, and kicked off the anti-grav systems, leading to a massive plummet and a crack in the TARDIS window. And I have to wonder if that crack is actually going to stay there now from this episode onwards. If you were paying attention, there was a similar crack in the giant TARDIS that doubled up as the Doctor's tomb. So maybe that crack is going to be there from now on. Who knows? Now, some have speculated that that rapid descent of the TARDIS, represents the fall of the 11th that Dorian was talking about back in Series 6. It certainly fits, because the question was answered, and for a short time, silence did fall alright when the Doctor's timeline was corrupted. However, it's also possible that Dorian's words could be referring to a future event, so until it's absolutely confirmed, I'm not going to say this was the fall of the 11th and the answering of the question, but it certainly would fit. Now, given that when Dorian mentioned Trenzalore, he referred to it as the fields of Trenzalore, I was kind of expecting something a little bit more, well, lush. But then again, it is a battleground, and it is a gravesite, a mass gravesite at that, so the visuals did match the atmosphere pretty well, and the opening shot of Trenzalore, well, the first shot we saw of Trenzalore, when the TARDIS is hovering above it, and the Doctor and Clara, they call her Jenna again, the Doctor and Clara are looking down on Trenzalore, was a very nice shot. Now, River's grave being present at Trenzalore was genuinely shocking, or rather, it would have been had they not given it away in the trailers before the episode. But given that River couldn't possibly be buried there because she's in the library, and there's no body for it to bury because it burned up when she downloaded herself into the library, it was obvious that the grave was there to be something else. And it being a secret entrance to the tomb was clever, and I did quite like the scene where Clara was parroting River's words, and I thought it was well acted by both women, especially Jenna. Her sort of enthusiasm when she goes, maybe it's a secret entrance to the tomb. I thought that was pretty well acted. Now, the Whisper Men were creepy villains, but I think maybe they were a little bit underused. Their outfits certainly fit the funereal air of Trenzalore in the episode itself. I got a very funereal vibe off the Whisper Men. They had the ability to stop people's hearts, which is a very menacing ability if you think about it. And their habit of always speaking in rhyme was very creepy. And on the side note of that, most of the rhymes they talked about came true. I mean, there was one about the girl that the Doctor tries to save, she'll die once more inside his grave, which of course she did, but then the Doctor saved her. technically she died, but technically she didn't. So, for the most part, their whispers came true, but some of them technically weren't true. It would have been nice to give I don't know, a backstory or an explanation to their origins on the screen, but it's fairly obvious that they were constructs of the Great Intelligence, which explains, by the way, that when the Intelligence stepped into the time tunnel, about 30 minutes in, they all vanished because they were linked to him. You could even say they were him. They never explained how that one Whisper Man was able to reconstitute itself after Strax attacked it, though, but maybe I'm thinking too much into this. As it was, they were pretty cool villains. They were basically there to just be henchmen for the Great Intelligence. But they performed their role pretty well. And while I still think that having Jenny die just to bring her back 10 minutes later was entirely redundant, I had to give some bonus points to Stephen Moffat for remembering Strax as a nurse, and that the technology he used to keep Clara alive, for a little while anyway, in the Snowmen, came here and saved Jenny's life. Also in this scene, Vastra's love for Jenny really came through here quite well. Oh, and for the record, it's not just me that happens to love the Paternoster gang. I was actually watching the episode for a second time with a female friend of mine, and when Jenny died for the first time inside the conference call and disappeared, that friend, who shall remain anonymous, don't worry, really was affected quite badly by her apparent death. So, it just goes to show I think that the characters are well liked and that a spin-off would work if they chose to do one. But I'm ranting, and I'm going off on a tangent, which I want to do, but hey. Moving on, there was some really good acting from all the main leads, I thought, in this episode. But special mention must go to Richard E. Grant. God damn, what a fantastic performance. He was extremely creepy, he was extremely menacing, and he really seemed to relish his role. He was in the episode for less than 10 minutes in total, but in that 10 minutes, he made a real impact. Both on the viewers, I think, as a striking character, and also on the storyline. We'll get to that in a second. The first time I watched the episode, I literally jumped when that Whisper Man passed through River. I was not expecting that at all, and again, goes to show just how creepy the Whisper Men are. Stephen Moffat said that he hoped these would become new favourite monsters. Not sure if they'll do that, but I can certainly see them becoming a cult favourite. I don't think, sadly, they'll be coming back because of what happened to them when the Great Intelligence stepped into the time tunnel, but we'll see. I've been wrong before that monsters wouldn't be returning, only for them to actually come back. Now, I loved the reference to the Valeyard. For those that don't know, the Valeyard is a future incarnation of the Doctor between his 12th and 13th lives, and it's basically his dark side. He appears in the classic serial Trial of a Time Lord, which isn't that good, and he is the prosecutor, and he tries to steal the Doctor's remaining regenerations, for a reason that is not well explained at all. So this is the first time that the Valeyard has been specifically mentioned. There's been aspects of him, such as the Doctor talking about getting darker and darker, and also the Dream Lord was probably the closest thing we've had to the Valeyard since the series came back in 2005. The other names that Dr. Simeon or the Great Intelligence had for the Doctor are intriguing. Now, Storm is obviously a reference to the oncoming Storm, which is his nickname on Skaro during the last days of the Time War. But the Beast is nothing we've ever heard him referred to as before, and it's intriguing. Has Stephen Moffat laid a foundation, I wonder, for future stories? Or is it a reference, unlikely, to the Satan Pit? Or did he just want a bit of dialogue that sounded cool? Time will tell, I guess. The bit where Dr. Simeon stripped off his own face to reveal that nothing was inside was very freaky, and it also gave the Whisper Men an added purpose as they became hosts, so to speak, for the Great Intelligence. It was a very neat way to explain why Dr. Simeon was somehow back despite dying in the Snowmen, and it's not just that it's an implied death in the Snowmen. Vastra quite clearly says Dr. Simeon is dead. And again, we didn't resort to yet another resurrection. But it also emphasised the Great Intelligence nature of being a parasite. It's a parasite in the Snowmen. It's technically a parasite in the Bells of St. John. Although, okay, in that case, it took more of a virtual form when it was speaking to Miss Kislet at the end of that episode. But also in its classic series appearances, it was considered a parasite as well. So that scene really got that across very well. Now, the Doctor's real name opening his tomb That explains why the question that Dorian talked about is so damn dangerous, and why the Doctor is so reluctant to open it. Even after the Whisper Men try and kill everyone by stopping their hearts, the Doctor still refuses to open it because he knows what's inside and what might happen if it falls into the wrong hands, which of course it does barely 5 minutes later. And even when he's being murdered by the Whisper Men, Strax is still hilarious. I don't know if I was meant to laugh when he said, "Don't worry, sir, I think I've got them rattled," as he's having his heart squeezed to death by one of the Whisper Men. Now, for a very brief second on first watch, I thought the Doctor's name was actually Please, because he said please and the tomb opened. But fortunately, it was River that opened the tomb with his real name, so it wasn't the case, and thank goodness, because his name being Please would have been so goddamn lame. I'm actually pretty glad that we didn't learn the name. Some people were angry that this was a cop-out, calling the episode The Name of the Doctor and then not revealing the name of the Doctor, but that wasn't the point of the title. The point of the title is that it's twofold. One, it's how they opened the tomb to get into the time stream. And two, it's referenced right at the end. And when I get to talk about the amazing ending to this episode, I'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I'm glad we didn't learn the name, because for me, that would have taken away some mystique about the character of the Doctor. He has a moniker rather than a name for a reason. Some of you may disagree, and if you do, please let me know below in the comments. Now, when the tomb opened up, it was fairly obvious there would be more than just the Doctor's body inside of it. I mean, after all, why would the Doctor's body be so dangerous that it was locked away like that? Also, from a production standpoint, it's because technically, if he's regenerated between being the 11th Doctor and the Battle of Trensel that finally killed him, it would be a future incarnation, and obviously they can't show that yet because they haven't cast a future incarnation if there even is going to be one. I'm not saying the series will end with Matt Smith as the Doctor, but then again, it wouldn't surprise me if it did. I guess we'll just have to see. The concept of the time tunnel is a very interesting one, and it makes sense. Presumably, travelling through time as much as the Doctor has would do damage to time itself, to the fabric of time itself, as he says. Now, when the Doctor approached the time tunnel with the sonic screwdriver, we got some more sound clips from the past, like we got in Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS. I think they were different to the ones mentioned in that episode, or the ones heard in that episode. Off the top of my head, I caught audio from, again, Trial of the Time Lord, the bit where Colin Baker is saying how the Daleks, the Cybermen, the Sontarans are still a nursery compared to the Time Lords when it comes to destruction and being cruel. Parting of the Ways, where the Doctor just says, "You were fantastic" to Rose. Voyage of the Damned, where the Doctor is revealing who he is to the passengers that have survived. I'm not going to do the whole quote. The Case of Androzani, where it's one of the cliffhangers to that story, where he says, "I'm about to die anyway, so you see," and I can't remember the rest of the quote. FreezingInferno might be able to help me out on that. And of course, one of my favourite quotes for the Pandora opens, when he's at Stonehenge, he shouts, "Hello, Stonehenge!" There was also some William Hartnell audio that I couldn't identify because I'm not very clued in when it comes to any Doctor before Tom Baker. I'm not really clued in when it comes to any Doctor after Tom Baker before Christopher Eccleston, but I at least know a little bit about their characters and their stories. I know next to nothing of the first to third Doctors. Now, this episode in general was very well paced, but the last 50 minutes in particular, they just didn't let up. They put the foot onto the gas pedal, and they never took it off. There was a couple of slight goofs or plot holes. When the Doctor collapses next to the time tunnel and Clara runs towards him, those who are sharp-eyed will notice she accidentally put her arm through the time tunnel as she ran past it, which is kind of amusing given what the time tunnel did when she went through it later in the episode. I think that's just one of those things that the production team didn't spot, or thought it was so minor it wasn't worth correcting or refilming, and they're probably right. Also, when the Doctor says somebody stop him, referring to Dr. Simian or the Great Intelligence, the Penrose gang just sort of stand there in the background. One of them could have possibly made a move, or all three of them, to stop Dr. Simian, but then again, they did just get their backsides handed to them by the Whisper Men, and they were probably frightened of it happening again to them, if not killing them outright this time. So again, plot hole, but it doesn't really damage much in terms of the storyline. Now, I've raved about how good Richard E. Grant's performance was in general in the whole 10 minutes he was in this episode. He was underused in the Snowmen, and though he got probably just about the same amount of screen time here, the difference is that was an hour-long episode. This is 45 minutes. Even though he was only in it for 10 minutes, he was easily one of the best parts of the episode. And his final words, before he went into the time tunnel, his little death speech, if you will, they were terrific. In one fell swoop, they explained his motivation, revealed his deep, seething hatred of the Doctor, and showed just how calculating he truly was. His plan to literally rewrite the Doctor's history and kill him all across space and time, that's beyond fiendish. Okay, so I have to admit that the Grey Intelligence would maybe not have been my first choice of the villain to do this, because he's only encountered the Doctor 4 times in total in the TV series prior to this episode. Twice in the classic series, and twice in this series in the Snowman, the Bells of St. John. And technically, he didn't encounter the Doctor in the Bells of St. John. He was there, but the Doctor didn't learn of his involvement at all. He was just in the background controlling Miss Kislet and the rest of them. But he has been thwarted 4 times in the past in the TV series, and several other times in the expanded universe, the audiobooks, the comics, that sort of thing. So I suppose, while maybe the Master would have been a more logical villain, I can see why they didn't want to waste the Master like this. And as I say, Richard E. Grant's performance was so good, I wouldn't overlook the fact that perhaps a more minor villain has gotten such a major part in the Doctor's history in this episode. The music that accompanied the scene when he went into the tunnel went really well with it, and then that goddamn scream when Richard E. Grant steps into the light and is presumably vaporized and split across 1,000 different points at space and time. Dear God! And actually that light that represents the time tunnel, that turning red once Dr. Simeon, and look on Dr. Solomon then, Dr. Simeon is finished meddling with it, that's a nice touch, and actually goes some way to explaining a theory I have about the last 10 minutes of the episode, which I'll get into a little bit later on, in a few minutes in fact. Now, we've seen what a universe without the Doctor there to save it would look like in the past, back in Turn Left, but here the consequences of what Dr. Simeon did, I can't speak, what Dr. Simeon did to the time stream were even more wide-ranging. Also, as in that story, as in Turn Left, the stars started going out. Now, Jenny's disappearance, and again, second death of the episode, was very well filmed. The camera pans in on Vastra, Jenny slowly moves behind her, and then in the next shot, Jenny suddenly completely disappeared. It was very nicely filmed. I preferred it much to her just sort of disappearing on camera like Strax did after Vastra shot him with that gun. And where she got that gun, goodness knows where, because she's never had it before. I take issue with Jenny dying for a second time, only to come back again 2 minutes later. But again, I can see why Stephen Moffat did it. He was just showing the consequences of Dr. Simeon's meddling with the Doctor's timeline. I feel perhaps the roles of Vastra and Jenny in this scene should have been reversed. It should have been Vastra that disappeared, and Jenny getting a chance to mourn her loss, and then confronting a once again evil Strax. But it's only a minor complaint, and again, I can see why he chose Vastra and Jenny in those roles as opposed to the reverse roles I just put forward. I'm glad that Jenny survived, and I'm even more glad that Strax's death was also written off, because Strax is such a great character. And even though he's now appeared several times, in fact they all appeared several times, they still haven't worn out their welcome yet. They may in the future if they keep showing up, like River did to a degree for some people. But so far they have not outstayed their welcome. Now, although this episode was called The Name of the Doctor and was all about the aftermath of the Doctor's death at Trenzalore, in some respects this was very much Clara's episode more than his. Jenna Louise Coleman shows some great acting as she was preparing to jump into the timeline, although the line about Souffle was a bit schmaltzy and a kind of a forced link to Oswin back in the Asylum of the Daleks. But her sacrifice showed that she was very brave, and she's shown to be quite brave in previous episodes. And on the whole, I thought it showcased her character traits pretty well. And it was very clever how the beginning of the episode was very similar to the ending, just with some extra bits added. Like the added part of the scene where the Doctor's about to steal the TARDIS and Clara steers him back on the right side. You can assume that perhaps he was going to steal that wrong TARDIS because the Great Intelligence steered him into it, and I don't know, maybe if it was faulty, it was going to blow up and kill him right at the start of his history. hence causing all the crazy corruption of the timeline in the first place. Again, I can only speculate on that one. But Gallifreyan Clara, no, she's not a Time Lord. She wasn't dressed like a Time Lord, but the Gallifreyan version of Clara put a stop to that and rewrote history so that all was well. Now, I'm claiming a partial... Oh, also, one more thing. This was the 10th Doctor's only appearance in the entire episode, and much like Paul McGann, it lasted only a few frames. But this one, I can understand more, but it would involve me getting into spoilers about the 50th anniversary, and I'm not going to do that. This is only about the name of the Doctor, not about the 50th anniversary. Now, I'm claiming a partially correct prediction on who Clara really was. I said back in the Nightmare in Silver review that she was the Doctor's guardian angel through time. That's who I thought she was. And she sort of was, but it didn't pan out why she was that. I didn't work out. So I can only claim a partial prediction. It's not like the River Song Melody Pond thing, where I got it pretty darn quickly and claimed that I got that from the start, because I did. So a partial prediction, not a full one, but given how unpredictable Stephen Moffat can be, I'm still pretty pleased with myself with that one. Also, Clara Oswin Oswald is an anagram of A Window Across All, and I'm a sucker for anagrams, and I should have seen that and guessed even sooner. But hey, now the scene between the Doctor and River Song in the giant TARDIS tomb was both heartfelt and moving, and it almost felt to me like it was River Song's true swan song, and that wasn't intended to be a pun, but it kind of became one. It's a bit of a stretch that the Doctor can suddenly see River when he couldn't before, seemingly. Although, of course, he could have been lying and seen her the whole time. But it was such a lovely scene that I didn't particularly mind that small plot hole. The Doctor kissing River when she wasn't really there, and the Paternoster Gang's subsequent reactions was a great moment all of itself. And I only just realised, by the way, that part of River's theme, which was present in Series 6 as well as this scene here, contains the melody from Here Comes the Bride. That is genius by Murray Gold. He is such a great composer, but that little musical cue, that's genius. Now, some people are reading way too much into River's supposed link with Clara. Let's clear this up right now. There is no official link. They're not two characters who are linked. The only link here is the telepathic one that was between the two women during the conference call that River kept open so she could keep communicating with her at Trenzalore. And the fact that River was still there after Clara jumped in the time stream, that was just to show that Clara was still alive. At least at that moment in time. River faded out at the end because she closed the link with Clara, not because Clara had died. I know that Stephen Moffat includes a lot of mysteries in his episodes, some obvious, some not so obvious, but there's no mystery here, folks. You're reading far too much into it. Now watch as he proves me wrong and there actually is a connection to them in Series 8 and I look like a Wally. Now people are calling the fact that Clara and then the Doctor himself survived entry into the time stream while Dr. Simeon was killed outright. They're regarding that as a massive plot hole. But I've got a theory on why it isn't. You've got to think of the time tunnel as a bloodstream in, say, a person. I mean, Dr. Simeon does refer to it as an open wound earlier in the episode. Now, Dr. Simeon is like a virus entering the bloodstream. His intention is to damage or outright destroy the timeline. So the timeline fights back, think of this as white blood cells attacking an invading virus, and kills him and splits him into thousands of different versions across time. Next person to go in is Clara, but her intentions are good and honourable. She undoes Simeon's actions and purifies the timeline, and this is shown by the colour changing from red back to blue. Clara's presence is, well, it's like antibodies that heal the bloodstream. So the timeline scatters her across time, but allows her to live because she wasn't trying to destroy it. The last person to go in is the Doctor. And the Doctor is the timeline, in effect, so he can't possibly be scattered by it. He does mention it's very bad for him to be in there because it's starting to collapse in on itself, but other than that, there are no harmful consequences for him, and this is like injecting your own blood back into yourself. Kind of a complicated theory, I know, but I honestly think that if you think of it like that, then that ending makes sense and isn't a plot hole. Alternatively, I'm just thinking way too much into it, as usual. But that's how I see it anyway. And the scene where Clara has fallen inside the Doctor's time stream and the Doctor's ghosts all appear, that was very nice, and again, a nice nod to nostalgia. But it would have been nice to see all 10 previous forms make an appearance, instead of just the First Doctor, the Fourth Doctor, the Fifth Doctor, the Sixth Doctor, briefly the Sixth Doctor, and the Ninth Doctor. And that, by the way, was the Ninth Doctor's only appearance. But then, given that Christopher Eccleston has basically cut ties with the show forever, or, well, maybe not forever, but certainly for the time being, it's not surprising he didn't get much of an appearance, the Ninth Doctor. And the Fifth Doctor, again, it's another blink and you'll miss him moment, but he's the one that runs by after 9, but before 4. Before the Fourth Doctor. Now, remember back in the review to Rings of Akaten when I said that, well, actually, the review to Bells of St. John, when I thought the leaf would be an important plot device for the finale, and then in Rings of Akaten when the leaf was destroyed, and I ended up retracting that statement? Damn you, Stephen Moffat, you made me second guess myself. I was right, and because I was right, I thought I was wrong because you destroyed the leaf, and basically you're the ultimate troll. Good going, Moffat, good going. Clara repeatedly saying, I don't know where I am. That's a nice throwback to both Asylum of the Daleks when Oswald was being converted, she says it several times, and the Bells of St. John, where of course it was a key phrase throughout the episode. Now when the Doctor goes into his own time stream and starts talking to Clara, the time stream does actually close behind him. But I think we can assume they both get out unscathed because the Doctor says to her, let's get back. Yes, Clara collapses, but I think that's more out of exhaustion more than anything else. I certainly don't think she died again. And just when you thought we couldn't have any more twists and turns, we get that cliffhanger. Sweet Jesus, was that ever well handled. I recognised John Hurt's voice the first time I heard him speak, the first time I was watching the episode, but it didn't hurt the moment. Again, that was not meant to be an intentional pun. It certainly didn't stop the moment when he turned round and the text comes up introducing John Hurt as the Doctor from blowing my goddamn mind. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you end a finale episode on a cliffhanger. That's just fantastic. There have been several different theories on who John Hurt's Doctor is going to be. Some have said that he comes before the First Doctor. Some have said that he is a future incarnation, but that can't possibly be true because the 11th Doctor remembered him. He couldn't possibly remember his future. Not at that point in time, anyway. So the only theory that makes sense to me, and I think it's the most popular theory on the internet at the moment, is that John Hurt comes between Paul McGann and Christopher Eccleston. So, effectively making him the 9th Doctor. If you look at his outfit, it did look a bit like a cross between the 8th Doctor and the 9th Doctor. However, the 11th Doctor says that this incarnation broke the promise, and it's obvious that he did something terrible. Maybe, just maybe, ending the Time War. But, again, I could be wrong about that. Hurt's Doctor says that whatever he did without choice in the name of peace and sanity. That certainly fits the Time War, given what the Time Wars were planning to do to end it. The whole ending time itself and ascending to a higher plane to become creatures of consciousness alone, that certainly would fit in the name of peace and sanity. So that's my theory. He comes between McGann and Eccleston, but for whatever reason, his future selves, Eccleston, Tennant and Smith, reject him as the Doctor. So he's the 9th incarnation, but Matt Smith is still technically the 11th Doctor. We'll see how accurate I was when the 50th anniversary comes rolling along. Whoever John Hurt is playing, whichever incarnation of the Doctor he truly is, this was an absolutely brilliant way to build to the 50th anniversary, and it's really got the fans talking again. So, hats off to Stephen Moffat. Just a brilliant twist, and certainly not one I saw coming until it was upon me. So overall thoughts on the episode, this was just fantastic from start to finish. It was devoid of many of the usual problems with Moffat's other scripts, that being rushing things to a conclusions that didn't make much sense or relied too heavily on Deus Ex Machinas or massive plot holes to work. And those problems that appeared in other scripts that did appear were very minor, and they didn't take away from the enjoyment one little bit, at least for me. The episode was very tightly paced. It flew by for me on the first watch. it seemed like more like half an hour than 45 minutes. And there was some brilliant acting all around by the 7 leads. That's Matt Smith, Jenna Louise Coleman, Alex Kingston, Dan Starkey, Neve McIntosh, Catherine Stewart, and of course, Richard E. Grant. Those 7 need to take a bow because their acting was superb throughout. The acting actually in this second half of Series 7 has been terrific. The implementation of some of the plot, not so much, but the acting, terrific. Stephen Moffat implemented some really grand ideas in the story, and by and large they all worked. I really like, for example, the time tunnel, and the idea that the Doctor would be buried in his TARDIS, which had decayed and grown because the stuff on the inside had leaked to the outside. Big, bold ideas, but they pretty much work within the mythos of the show. The Whisper Men were a little underused, but they served their purpose well, and honestly, that's my only real gripe with this episode. And Richard E. Grant has a great intelligence more than made up for that. And of course, that damn cliffhanger at the end. Just wow. I'm not afraid to say this is my favourite episode that Stephen Moffat has written since he took over the running of the show. And it may rank up there with the best of the new Doctor Who episodes since 2005 of all time. Although, in fairness, that covers a lot of ground. 7 series, numerous Christmas specials, and the 4 specials that David Tennant did, although I don't think any of them could rank up against the best of all time, apart from maybe The Waters of Mars. But now's not the time to tangent. So yeah, just a fantastic episode from start to finish, and a brilliant way to make the season end with a bang. And also a brilliant way, by the way, to link directly into the 50th anniversary. And about that, roll on the 50th anniversary. It's a shame we have to wait 6 months for it, but hopefully, if it's anything as good as this finale was, it's going to be more than worth the wait. So, thank you for joining me for this extremely long, but necessarily long, review of The Name of the Doctor. And our next review will be in 6 months' time for the 50th anniversary. There will also be something a little special going up at the weekend, all being well and all plans going to form, which will also be about Doctor Who. I'm going to leave that as a little bit of a surprise, so I'm not going to tell you outright what it is, but expect that video to go up, hopefully, towards the latter half of the weekend. It is a bank holiday Monday, so maybe I'll put it up then. Who knows? Until then, bye for now.